I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen, she stammered, her voice thin and trembling. Is that true? I turned to my sister, anger bubbling just below the surface. Now's not the time for this, she snapped, trying to deflect. Lily, you need to come first, my voice cracked, raw and urgent. I caught myself mid-motion, hand raised, trembling in the air between us. A line I never thought I'd cross hovered so close. My breath caught, and shame poured in. I lowered my arm slowly, my chest tight with the weight of what had just almost happened. This moment, this ugly, shattering moment, would stay with me forever. A memory buried so deep I'd never let it surface. It all started with a promise to pick up my niece, Lily, from preschool, a promise forced on me by my sister. Pick her up tomorrow too, she had said the night before, her voice clipped. Why are you always so desperate? I'd snapped back. You're a stay-at-home mom, you've got the time. That's not the point, she said, brushing me off. In the background, I heard Lily's tiny, hacking cough. Is Lily sick? I asked sharply. No, she's fine, my sister replied too quickly. But she's coughing. It's nothing. Look, can you just keep her for a while? For how long? A week. I'm going abroad, she said flatly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. What? My voice rose, disbelief edging into fury. I can't do that. Well, she said coldly, then I'll just leave her at the preschool. If nobody picks her up, that's on you. You're impossible, I spat. But the thought of my niece being abandoned like that forced my hand. I begrudgingly agreed, telling myself it was for Lily's sake. The next day, I got a frantic call from the preschool hours before I was meant to pick her up. Ms. Taylor, we've been trying to reach Lily's mother, but we can't get through to her. You're listed as the emergency contact. Lily collapsed at school. She's been taken to the hospital. My heart plummeted. I raced to the hospital, but when I arrived, the sight before me felt like a punch to the chest. Lily was lying there, surrounded by machines, her tiny body frail and motionless. The doctor explained that she'd been running a fever and collapsed during playtime. The preschool had called for an ambulance when they couldn't reach my sister. At the hospital, the preschool director cornered me. Her face was pale, her voice tight with barely concealed anger. You're Lily's aunt, right? Yes, I said weakly. We've tried calling her mother countless times. Her work said she's on vacation. Do you know where she is? She's overseas, I admitted, my voice barely audible. The director's eyes widened in disbelief. Overseas? She sent her child to school in this condition and then just left the country? I swallowed hard, shame burning my throat as the director recounted the day's events. Lily had come to school with a flushed face, clearly unwell. They'd checked her daily temperature sheet, something required to be filled out by parents each morning. It was blank. The preschool refused to accept Lily that morning. Her temperature was 37.8 degrees Celsius, above the 37.5 degree limit for attendance. When the staff pointed this out, they told my sister to take her home. But my sister waved off their concern with a dismissive smile. Her temperature's always a little high. It's not a problem, she insisted, brushing past the teacher. Despite their protests, she left Lily at the preschool and walked out the door. The staff tried calling her multiple times throughout the day, but her phone went unanswered. Frustrated and worried, they eventually called my parents, only to find that they weren't home. They were both at work. Desperate, the preschool dug through old records and found a year-old emergency contact number. It was mine. This should never have happened, the preschool director said, her voice trembling as she stood by Lily's hospital bed. Her usual composed demeanor had cracked under the weight of the situation, tears pooling in her eyes. I am so sorry, I whispered, guilt wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I'll contact my sister. I apologized again to the director and the chaperone before they reluctantly left to return to the school. Immediately, I dialed my sister's number. The line was dead. I tried again, and again, dozens of calls, hundreds, each one unanswered. I called my parents, explaining the situation in hurried, broken sentences. They rushed to the hospital as fast as they could, my mother clutching her phone like a lifeline. It's okay, she said over and over, though it sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Lily's going to be okay. We're at the hospital. Everything will be fine. But it wasn't fine. The doctors tried everything they could, but Lily's condition only worsened. Her tiny body, so full of life just days before, began to fail her. I kept calling my sister, desperation mounting with every unanswered ring, but no matter how many times I tried, there was only silence on the other end. 2 days later, that fragile little life slipped away. Lily, only 2 years old, passed without her mother's touch, without her mother's presence. How could something so cruel, so heartless, happen? I couldn't stop the tears. They poured freely, blurring the sterile walls of the hospital around me. The grief was unbearable, a heavy weight pressing against my chest, and no amount of apologies or explanations would ever bring her back. As I touched Lily's cold, fragile body, a wave of guilt washed over me. Why didn't I ask my sister where she was going? Why didn't I stop her from leaving? I couldn't stop the questions from swirling in my mind, each one a blade of blame cutting deeper into my heart. "It's not your fault," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible over my sobs, but even as she said the words, tears streamed down her face, matching my grief in their depth. I tried over and over to reach my husband, to tell him what had happened, but his phone was unreachable, just like everyone else. Time dragged on, each moment heavier than the last. In the end, I arranged my niece's funeral without a word from my sister. The day of the funeral came, and my sister finally called. I had my phone with me, though I hadn't expected to answer it. The monks were chanting as I sat there, staring at Lily's small, lifeless form. My phone buzzed, and I answered it without thinking. "Oh, hey, thanks for taking care of Lily," my sister's voice chirped from the other end, casual as ever. "I just landed at the airport. On my way home. What do you want as a souvenir?" I froze. "You." I choked out, rage and disbelief suffocating my words. What is it? "I can't hear you," she said, irritated. What are you doing?" My voice cracked, sharp and full of fury. The monks' chanting halted as my words rang through the room. "Huh? What's with the attitude?" she asked, completely oblivious to the devastation around her. You took a child's life," I shouted, unable to hold back any longer. "Lily, she died. Do you even have the faintest idea how lonely she was? This isn't funny, we're not laughing." The silence that followed felt suffocating. I took several deep breaths, trying to compose myself. "I'm in the middle of Lily's funeral. Get back here as soon as you can," I said through clenched teeth, before hanging up. I apologized to the monks for disrupting their chant, but one of them gently placed his hand on my head, offering silent comfort. Later, as we prepared to leave for the crematorium, my sister arrived, out of breath and frantic. Behind her was my husband, looking equally disoriented. I couldn't believe my eyes. "Why is he here?" My sister collapsed by Lily's side, her sobs filling the air. Why did this happen?" she cried, but no one responded to her. My relatives stood around her, cold and silent, but none of them said a word to place blame. I think they were sparing Lily, even now. I didn't speak to either of them until after the cremation. It felt as though Lily was waiting for her mother, though she would never get that chance. Once the cremation was done, we returned to my parents' house. My sister took the brunt of my parents' anger. I sat in silence, listening to their accusations until my gaze fell on the luggage near the door. Why were they both carrying luggage from the same airport? I noticed the airline sticker on the handle of each suitcase. They had come from the same place? My sister clamped her mouth shut, refusing to speak, but my husband finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice flat. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Is that true?" I asked my sister, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked away, her silence louder than words. "Then what?" I pressed. "Is this really the time for your excuses? You have to put Lily first," I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of grief and fury. I raised my hand, but I froze before it could land on either of them. My anger wasn't about their betrayal, it was about what they had done to my niece. It was something I couldn't forgive, no matter what. "Stop crying, you don't have the right to shed tears," I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "You ignored hundreds of calls from me. Why is it so hard to think something could have happened to your own child, while you two were wrapped up in your own selfish affairs? Lily was suffering, she died, and it's because of you. You'll never be forgiven for this. You should die a slow, agonizing death for what you did." "I'm sorry," my sister murmured, her voice breaking, but I could hear the emptiness in her words. "Do you think that apology makes up for what you did? Do you think this is your penance to Lily? You're lying to yourself. You're just as guilty as he is." You ignored my calls, too. You left my niece to die, and you're just as responsible. Go to hell. My parents didn't stop me, they stood in silence, watching the destruction unfold, but they didn't intervene. Don't you ever show your face here again. You're not my daughter anymore. My mother's voice cracked as she spoke, but her words were resolute. I can't forgive you. Get out, now. Why? Why am I the only one to blame for all of this? I don't even consider you my family anymore. My sister left, her face pale, without even a glance at Lily's remains. We would discuss her divorce later. My husband stood there, motionless, his guilt written all over his face. He didn't speak, but he handed over everything, our shared assets, the alimony, settling everything with a cold finality. The divorce was quick, just as empty as his apology. You think this is your atonement? You think this will wash away your sins? Fool, you'll carry them with you for the rest of your life. My sister and my husband were both charged with child abuse. They fought their cases, but no one stood with them, not even the court-appointed attorneys. My parents and I spoke nothing but the truth. In the end, my sister received a 5-year sentence. My husband, who had known about Lily's fever and still let her go to preschool, was sentenced to 2 years. 5 years and 2 years. How is a life worth only 7 years? The emptiness in my chest deepened. These two would never see the light of day again. 6 years have passed since that day. I remarried and gave birth to a beautiful child, though I'll never forget Lily. It's my child who has slowly healed my heart. I want to be the mother I always dreamed of being, one who is always there, no matter what. They say sin never truly goes away. It follows you, a shadow that will never leave. And they will carry it with them for the rest of their lives. But even that isn't enough. Because human life is precious, and nothing can bring Lily back.